Hello dear friends. Welcome back to our channel. Today, I bring you a story that you will definitely enjoy. Get yourself a cup of coffee and a comfortable seat so that we can start exploring this story. The opulent penthouse shimmered in the soft glow of ambient lights, its floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a breathtaking view of Chicago's radiant skyline. Inside, however, the atmosphere was anything but tranquil. Alexander Blake stood stiffly by the grand piano, his hands clenched into tight fists. Across the room, his parents, Victoria and Richard Blake, sat with expressions as cold and unyielding as the marble floors beneath them. "Alexander," Victoria began sharply, "this isn't open for discussion. The wedding is in a month, and you will marry Isabella Davenport." Alexander let out a bitter laugh, pacing like a restless animal. "Isabella Davenport? You can't be serious. I barely know her. She's practically a stranger." "She's a Davenport," Richard interrupted, his deep voice resonating like thunder. "That's all that matters. This alliance will solidify the future of Blake Enterprises. It's a partnership beneficial to all. Beneficial to you, maybe, not to me. I won't marry someone I don't love. This is my life, not a corporate deal." Alexander shot back, turning to face them. Victoria's lips pressed into a tight line. "Your life," she said icily, "is a privilege, one we've sacrificed endlessly to provide. The least you can do is fulfill your obligations." "Obligations?" Alexander echoed, his voice rising. "What about my happiness? Or does that mean nothing as long as the company thrives?" "Don't be dramatic," Victoria snapped. "Love is a luxury. Stability is what matters. Isabella is intelligent, capable, and from a respected family. She's perfect for you." "She's perfect for you. This has nothing to do with me," Alexander countered, his frustration boiling over. Richard rose to his feet, his imposing frame casting a long shadow across the room. "Enough, Alexander. Either you go through with this marriage or consider yourself cut off from the family, the company, everything." Alexander's heart pounded. "You'd really do that? Disown me for refusing to be a pawn in your scheme?" Victoria stood as well, her expression unyielding. "We won't need to. You'll make the right choice." The room fell silent, the weight of their ultimatum settling like a storm cloud. Finally, Alexander turned away, gazing out at the city lights. "This conversation is over," he said, his voice hollow. "Leave." Without another word, Victoria and Richard gathered their belongings and left, the sound of the door closing echoing through the empty penthouse. Later that evening, Alexander found himself wandering the bustling streets of Chicago, the cold night air biting at his skin. His thoughts raced as he walked aimlessly, searching for a way out. He couldn't let his parents control his life, but their threats were real. Losing everything wasn't an option. As he turned a corner, his steps faltered. A young woman sat on the sidewalk, leaning against a building. Her worn backpack rested beside her, and her oversized jacket offered little protection from the chill. When she looked up, her striking green eyes met his, framed by messy brown hair. There was a quiet strength in her wary gaze. "Spare some change?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Alexander stopped, studying her for a moment. "What's your name?" She hesitated before replying, "Nina." His mind raced as a wild idea began to take shape. "Nina," he repeated, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. "What if I told you I could change your life?" She frowned, skepticism in her expression. "I'd say you've been watching too many movies." Alexander chuckled lightly. "Fair, but I'm serious. What if I could get you off the streets? A place to live, food, clothes, everything you need to start over?" Suspicion crept into her voice. "What's the catch?" Standing tall, he shoved his hands into his coat pockets. "You marry me, just for a year." Nina's expression turned incredulous. Excuse me? Marry you? A total stranger? I'm not crazy, Alexander said quickly. I just need a wife for a business arrangement. You'd have everything you need, and after a year, we part ways. No strings attached. She shook her head, letting out a bitter laugh. This has to be a joke. Marry you? Are you out of your mind? I'm serious, Alexander said, his voice unwavering. I'll draw up a contract. You'll be protected, and I'll pay you enough to help you get back on your feet, permanently. Nina studied him, her guarded expression softening ever so slightly. Why me? Alexander hesitated, the answer clear in his mind, but too personal to admit. Because you don't know me. You don't care about my money or status. You're real. Nina looked down at her hands, her thoughts swirling. The proposal was outrageous, but her reality was equally so. She had nothing to lose and perhaps everything to gain. Okay, she said finally, meeting his gaze. But if you're lying, I'm out. I'm not, Alexander promised. As their hands met in a firm shake to seal the deal, neither of them could have imagined how that moment would alter their lives forever. Nina sat in the warm glow of Alexander's penthouse, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She gazed out at the dazzling Chicago skyline, a stark contrast to the streets she'd called home. The luxury surrounding her felt surreal, like a dream she wasn't part of. Alexander sat across from her, his tailored suit and polished demeanor worlds apart from her reality. She couldn't believe they were having this conversation. So, she began cautiously, you want me to marry you to avoid marrying someone else? Alexander leaned back, his expression calm but resolute. That's the gist of it. Nina let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. You don't even know me. That's the point, Alexander replied. You're not like the people I deal with. You're honest, genuine. Her gaze narrowed. You don't know that. I could be lying to you right now. Then why aren't you? He countered, his eyes steady. Nina looked away, her chest tightening. His confidence unsettled her, but his offer was undeniably tempting. Now, faced with Alexander's shocking proposal, her instinct was to refuse. I don't know. It sounds crazy, she said at last, breaking the silence. Alexander leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. I get that, but this isn't a scam, and it's not about love. It's a business arrangement. You'll have food, clothes, a safe place to stay, and a chance to start over. In a year, we'll go our separate ways. Nina studied him, her instincts warring with her desperation. What's in it for you? My parents, Alexander admitted, his voice laced with frustration. They're forcing me into an arranged marriage to merge two companies. If I'm already married, their plan falls apart. She frowned. So, I'd just be a cover story? Essentially, he said, nodding, but I'll make it worth your while. You'll have control over the terms, your privacy, your freedom, everything. Nina's grip on her cup tightened. The idea of marrying a stranger felt dangerous, but so was the alternative, returning to the streets with no future in sight. And if I say no, she asked, then I'll find someone else, Alexander said simply. Honestly, I hope you'll consider it, Alexander said, his tone genuine. Nina hesitated, weighing her options. The risks were immense, but so was the opportunity. Fine, she said at last, her voice steady. But if this goes sideways, I'm out. Alexander nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. Fair enough. I'll have my lawyer draft the paperwork tomorrow. As he walked her to the door, Nina paused, glancing back over her shoulder. You're taking a big risk, you know. What if I turn out to be a nightmare? Alexander allowed a faint smile. Then I guess we're both gambling. Nina returned a small, uncertain smile before stepping into the elevator. As the doors closed, she exhaled deeply. What Alexander didn't know, what no one knew, was that Nina wasn't just a struggling musician. She was Nina Hanover, the estranged daughter of Jonathan Hanover, a once powerful business tycoon whose empire had crumbled in a public scandal years earlier. Nina had spent her entire adult life distancing herself from her family's tarnished name, determined to forge her own path. If Alexander ever uncovered the truth, everything could collapse. As the elevator descended, Nina whispered to herself, "You can handle this. It's just a year." But deep down, she knew nothing about the arrangement would be simple. The first morning in Alexander's penthouse was surreal for Nina. Standing in the sleek, ultra-modern kitchen, she stared at the marble countertops and high-end appliances, feeling completely out of place. The refrigerator was stocked with imported delicacies she couldn't even pronounce, and the view from the floor-to-ceiling windows made her head spin. "Coffee?" Alexander's voice startled her as he entered the room, casually dressed in a fitted t-shirt and jeans. Sure," Nina replied, still taking in her surroundings as if they might disappear. Alexander poured 2 cups and handed her one, watching as she cautiously took a sip. "You look like you're waiting for the ceiling to collapse." Nina smirked. "It's just a lot. I've never lived anywhere like this." "You'll get used to it," Alexander said, leaning against the counter. "Consider it part of the arrangement." She raised an eyebrow. "Right. The arrangement. Married one day, strangers the next." He chuckled. "Unconventional, I'll admit, but you'll be fine. You're tougher than you look." Nina didn't respond, taking another sip of coffee and staring out at the skyline. She wondered how long she could keep her guard up. Over the next few weeks, the clash between their lifestyles became glaringly evident. Nina's fiercely independent nature didn't mesh easily with Alexander's world of opulence. She insisted on cooking her own meals instead of relying on the housekeeper, much to Alexander's amusement. "I didn't think it was possible to burn eggs," Alexander teased one morning as she scraped a charred mess off a frying pan. "Don't start with me, Mr. Perfect," Nina retorted, though the twitch of a reluctant smile played on her lips. Despite their rocky start, they began to find an unexpected rhythm. Alexander was impressed by Nina's sharp wit and candid observations, while Nina started to see cracks in Alexander's confident exterior. One evening, she found him alone in his home office, staring at a photograph on his desk. It was a picture of a young Alexander, perched on his father's lap, his smile wide and carefree. "You look happy," Nina said softly, leaning against the doorway. Alexander glanced up, startled, before quickly turning the photo face down. Appearances can be deceiving. Curious, Nina stepped closer. "What happened?" He hesitated before letting out a heavy sigh. "My parents have always been controlling. To them, I'm not a person. I'm an extension of the company. My entire life has been about meeting their expectations." "That sounds exhausting," Nina said, frowning. "It is," Alexander admitted. "That's why I needed to break free. This whole marriage thing, it's not just about defying them. It's about proving I can make my own choices." "Choices," Nina echoed, nodding slowly, her initial skepticism giving way to understanding. "I get it, more than you might realize." One sleepless evening, Alexander wandered through the penthouse and heard faint music coming from the living room. Following the sound, he found Nina seated at the upright piano in the corner, her fingers gliding effortlessly over the keys. The haunting melody filled the space, captivating him. She was so lost in the music that she didn't notice him at first. "You're incredible," Alexander said softly when the piece ended. Nina startled, turning to face him. "I didn't realize anyone was listening." "I didn't know you could play," he replied, stepping closer. "Why didn't you tell me?" She shrugged, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It's not something I share. Just a part of my past I'd rather leave there. Alexander studied her, sensing there was more to the story, but he didn't press. Well, you should play more often. You're really talented. Nina offered a small, uncertain smile. Maybe. The arrangement faced its first major test at a charity gala weeks later. Alexander had to introduce Nina as his wife, and she felt entirely out of her depth. "You'll be fine," Alexander reassured her as they stepped into the grand ballroom. "Just smile and nod." "Easy for you to say," Nina muttered, nervously smoothing the hem of her borrowed evening gown. To her surprise, and Alexander's, Nina navigated the crowd with unexpected ease. Her natural charm and quick wit impressed several influential guests, even rendering Alexander's skeptical parents momentarily silent. "Your wife is quite the charmer," one guest remarked to Alexander. "Yes," Alexander replied, his gaze lingering on Nina. "She is." But the evening wasn't without its difficulties. Victoria Blake pulled Nina aside, her polished smile thin and icy. "You played your part well tonight," Victoria said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Thank you," Nina replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "But don't think for a second that I'm fooled. I know there's more to you than meets the eye, and I will find out what you're hiding." Nina's breath hitched, but she kept her composure. "Good luck with that," she said, turning sharply and walking away. Back at the penthouse, Nina couldn't shake Victoria's words. She knew the truth about her past would surface eventually, but when it did, what would it cost her? Alexander noticed her quiet mood. "You okay?" he asked. Nina forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she knew the arrangement was becoming far more complicated than she had anticipated. The cold precision of Victoria Blake's study contrasted sharply with the warmth of the rest of the Blake mansion. Sitting at her desk, Victoria examined her laptop, a thick dossier spread out before her. The face staring back at her from the screen was unmistakably Nina's, though younger and surrounded by scandalous headlines. "Hanover Empire crumbles amid fraud scandal." Victoria's lips curled into a thin smile as she picked up her phone, dialing Alexander. Alexander was in his office reviewing a proposal when his phone buzzed. Seeing his mother's name, he hesitated before answering. "What is it, Mother?" Victoria's tone was clipped. "We need to talk. It's about your wife." Alexander sighed, leaning back in his chair. "What about her?" "She's not who she claims to be," Victoria said. "Come to the house. Now." The tension in the mansion was palpable as Alexander entered the study. Victoria stood by her desk, the dossier open and waiting. "What's this about?" Alexander asked, his patience wearing thin. Victoria gestured to the documents. "Your wife, Nina Hanover. Does that name ring a bell?" Alexander frowned, stepping closer to scan the pages. His eyes widened as realization dawned. "Hanover? As in Jonathan Hanover?" "Yes," Victoria confirmed, her voice sharp. "The disgraced mogul who lost everything in one of the largest corporate frauds of the decade. That's her father." Alexander shook his head, trying to process. "Why didn't she tell me?" "Because she's been hiding it," Victoria said coldly. "Think about it, Alexander. She's using you. This is her way of clawing her family's reputation back from the ashes." Alexander clenched his jaw, his mind racing. "You don't know that." Victoria stepped closer, her voice low and biting. "Don't be naive. You've been played. She's not some innocent musician you rescued. She's a Hanover. This was her plan all along." Alexander returned to the penthouse, his thoughts a chaotic mix of doubt and anger. Nina was in the living room, sketching something on a notepad. She looked up as he entered, her smile fading at the intensity of his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting the notepad aside. Alexander crossed his arms, his tone colder than she'd ever heard. Why didn't you tell me who you really are? Nina froze, her breath catching. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb, Alexander snapped. I know you're Nina Hanover, daughter of Jonathan Hanover, the man who nearly destroyed countless lives. Nina's face paled, but she stood her ground. So what? You went digging into my past? I didn't, Alexander said sharply. My mother did. She thinks you're using me to restore your family's reputation. Is she right? Nina's hands clenched into fists. You think I wanted this? You think I chose to be his daughter? I've spent my whole life running from that name. Then why didn't you tell me? Alexander demanded. Why keep it a secret? Because it's not who I am. Nina shouted, her voice cracking. I've spent years trying to escape the shadow of my father's mistakes. The name Hanover ruined my life. I lost everything, my home, my family, my dreams. All I've ever wanted was to be Nina. Just Nina. Alexander's eyes narrowed, his anger clashing with the flicker of understanding her words sparked. So none of this was real? It was all just convenient? Nina stared at him, her chest heaving. You don't get it, do you? I never asked for this arrangement. You came to me. You needed me. And somewhere along the way, I thought maybe, just maybe, you saw me for more than my past. But I was wrong. Alexander looked away, the weight of her words pressing on him. Nina grabbed her backpack, her voice trembling. You know what? Maybe your mother's right. Maybe I don't belong here. But at least I know who I am. Can you say the same? She walked past him, her steps quick and resolute. Nina, Alexander called, his voice softer now. She paused at the door but didn't turn around. Goodbye, Alexander. And then she was gone. The penthouse felt unbearably quiet after she left. Alexander sank onto the couch, running a hand through his hair. The truth had shaken him, but the way he had handled it left his chest aching with regret. He stared at the photo of them from the charity gala. Her radiant smile, so genuine, made his earlier accusations feel hollow. Alexander buried his face in his hands, wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Alexander sat alone, staring at the grand piano in the corner of the room. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of the city outside. Her anguished words echoed in his mind. At least I know who I am. Can you say the same? He had been so quick to judge, blinded by his mother's manipulation and his own insecurities. Nina wasn't using him. She had been surviving, fighting to reclaim her life despite the shadow of her father's name. Closing his eyes, Alexander pictured her at the piano, her fingers dancing over the keys. She wasn't defined by her family's scandal. She was brilliant, resilient, and honest, and he had let her slip away. Meanwhile, Nina's world began to shift. After leaving Alexander, she returned to what she knew best, her music. She started performing at small venues, her confidence growing with each set. At a cozy jazz bar downtown, Nina sat on a stool with her guitar in hand. The audience, though modest in size, was attentive, captivated by the soul in her voice and the passion in her melodies. When she finished her set, the applause was warm and genuine, a balm to the wounds left by Alexander's accusations. For the first time in years, Nina felt as though she was reclaiming her identity, one note at a time. Identity, not as a Hanover, but as an artist. Your voice is incredible, a man said as Nina packed up her guitar after her set. Have you considered recording? Nina offered a polite smile but shook her head, one step at a time. Back at the penthouse, Alexander couldn't shake the emptiness Nina's absence had left behind. Desperate to make amends, he turned to Clara, his trusted assistant. She's amazing, Clara, Alexander said, pacing the room, and I completely blew it. I need to fix this. Clara raised an eyebrow. You're not exactly subtle about it, Alexander. So, what's the plan? I don't know, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. But I can't let her go, not like this. Clara thought for a moment before smiling. If music is her world, maybe you should speak her language. Inspired, Alexander sprang into action. He reached out to venue owners and industry contacts, pulling every string to organize a private concert. But this wasn't just any concert, it was for Nina. He quietly attended one of her gigs, watching her pour her heart into her performance. As her music filled the room, he felt his pride and determination swell. 2 weeks later, Nina received an unexpected invitation, a handwritten note delivered to her apartment. Nina, you deserve to be seen, to be heard. Please come to the Grand Avenue Theater tomorrow at 7 p.m. Curiosity and skepticism battled within her, but something about the note compelled her to go. When she arrived at the theater, her breath caught. The space was intimate yet elegant, lit with warm, golden lights that illuminated a grand piano at the center of the stage. The small audience consisted of familiar faces from the music industry, people she admired but never dreamed of meeting. A man approached her with a kind smile. Nina Hanover? She tensed at the name but nodded. I've heard about your music. I'm excited to hear you play tonight. Play? Nina asked, confused. The man gestured toward the stage. This is your show. Before she could fully process what was happening, Alexander appeared, looking nervous but resolute. Alexander, she said, her tone guarded. What is this? It's for you, he replied, his voice steady despite the tension. I wanted the world to see what I see every time you play. This is your dream, Nina. Let me help you achieve it. Her heart raced as she took in the room, the weight of his words sinking in. I fell in love with you, Alexander continued, stepping closer. Not your name or your past, just you. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it, if you'll let me. Nina swallowed hard, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Alexander, you didn't just give me a chance. You gave me my dream. He smiled softly. Then maybe some things are worth another try. That night, Nina stepped onto the stage, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the piano keys. But as she began to play, all her doubts melted away. The audience was captivated, and when she finished her final song, the applause was thunderous. Alexander stood at the back of the room, his chest tight with pride and hope. When the theater emptied, Nina found Alexander waiting for her near the stage. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. I did, he replied. Because you're worth it. Nina studied him for a long moment, then smiled. Maybe we both are. As they left the theater together, the rift between them finally felt like it was beginning to heal. Back at the penthouse, Alexander and Nina sat across from each other in the living room. The air between them, no longer heavy with anger, was filled with quiet understanding. I don't expect everything to be perfect overnight, Alexander said, his voice steady yet vulnerable. But I want us to move forward together, not as strangers in an arrangement, but as partners. Nina met his gaze, her green eyes searching his face for any hint of pretense. All she saw in his eyes was sincerity. It won't be easy, Nina said softly. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I know, Alexander replied, leaning forward, but I'm willing to work for it, every day, if that's what it takes. A small smile curved Nina's lips. You're stubborn, you know that? So are you, Alexander countered with a gentle laugh. They both chuckled, the tension easing as they took the first steps toward rebuilding what had been broken. Over the next year, their relationship deepened, transforming into something genuine. Nina's music career flourished, earning her recognition in the industry. Alexander, her most ardent supporter, was always by her side, attending every performance with pride. At the same time, Nina encouraged Alexander to mend his strained relationships. With her help, he confronted his parents. While Richard remained distant, Victoria's icy demeanor softened as she witnessed Nina's unwavering love for her son. "She's stronger than I gave her credit for," Victoria admitted to Alexander one evening. "And so are you." Alexander nodded, his heart lightened by his mother's newfound acceptance. 1 year to the day after their whirlwind marriage, Alexander planned a surprise for Nina. She had just finished a sold-out performance at a prestigious concert hall. The applause still echoed in her ears as she stepped backstage. "Wonderful show, Miss Hanover," a stagehand said, handing her a bouquet of roses. "Thank you," Nina replied with a smile, accepting the flowers. Turning a corner, she froze. The stage had been cleared, and there, standing at its center, was Alexander, holding a small velvet box. A few close friends, including Clara and Jenny, stood quietly in the wings, watching. "Alexander," Nina said, her voice trembling slightly. He smiled, warmth radiating from his eyes. "A year ago, we started something that was supposed to be temporary, a deal. But somewhere along the way, you became my everything. You've made me see the world differently. You've made me better." Nina's heart raced as Alexander dropped to one knee, opening the box to reveal a simple yet elegant diamond ring. "Nina Hanover," he said, his voice steady, "will you marry me again? This time, forever?" Tears welled in her eyes as she stepped closer. "Yes," she laughed, wiping her cheeks, "but no more contracts." The small audience erupted in cheers as Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss. Their wedding was a simple yet elegant affair, held in a garden under the stars. Guests from all walks of life, Alexander's business associates, Nina's music community, and even a few former rivals, gathered to celebrate their union. Victoria, dressed in a tasteful lavender gown, approached Nina as the reception began. "I owe you an apology," Victoria said sincerely. "I misjudged you. You've shown strength and grace I didn't think possible." Nina smiled warmly. "Thank you, Victoria. That means more than you know." The two women exchanged a brief, understanding nod before Victoria returned to her table. As the night unfolded, Alexander and Nina shared their first dance beneath a canopy of fairy lights. The world seemed to fade away as they moved in perfect harmony, the soft music wrapping around them. "I can't believe how far we've come," Nina whispered. Alexander smiled, his hand tightening around hers. "I can. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." "To think," Nina said with a laugh, "it all started with a crazy deal." As the stars twinkled above, they knew their journey, marked by challenges, heartbreak, and redemption, had led them to a love neither could have imagined. Their story reminds us that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, even from a marriage of convenience. It shows that trust, forgiveness, and resilience can transform any obstacle into something extraordinary. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who loves tales of love and redemption. For more inspiring stories, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next heartwarming tale.